You know what really grinds my gears? When Donald shriveled empty nutsack campaigns on transparency, then guards pedophile secrets. Like their nuclear fucking codes, the stench of sealed envelopes. There's a particular smell to institutional rot, not the obvious reek of garbage left festering in August heat, but something more insidious. It's the scent of manila folders gathering dust in climate-controlled federal archives, the odor of redaction ink drying on pages that describe horrors we're apparently too delicate to witness, the stale air of locked vaults where evidence of elite depravity sits like pickled specimens in formaldehyde. That's the smell wafting off the Jeffrey Epstein case right now, and it's making my stomach turn in ways that no amount of antacids can fix. Here's the scene. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer stands at a podium, flanked by fellow Democrats, announcing they're invoking something called the Rule of Five, an obscure federal law that sounds like it should involve basketball or poker, but instead gives 5 Senate committee members the power to demand federal agencies cough up documents. They want everything: files, evidence, materials related to the Epstein case. Everything the Justice Department and FBI have been sitting on like broody hens protecting rotten eggs. The measure of a man's real character is what he would do if he knew he would never be found out. Thomas Babington Macaulay. But what happens when the man in question campaigned specifically on being found out, on transparency, on draining swamps and exposing corruption, and then suddenly clutches those secrets tighter than a miser grips his last fucking nickel? The shriveled promise maker, who can't remember his own bullshit. Let me paint you a picture of cognitive dissonance so breathtaking it could qualify as performance art. Donald shriveled empty nutsack spent months on the campaign trail, promising to release all Epstein documents. Not some, not a carefully curated selection, all of them. He positioned himself as the truth teller, the man who'd finally exposed the rot, the guy who wasn't afraid to name names and burn down the pedophile protection racket that allegedly infests the highest echelons of power. Fast forward to today. He's got FBI Director Kash Patel. He's got Attorney General Pam Bondi. Both promised earlier this year they'd release additional information. Both have the authority to make it happen with a phone call and a signature. And yet, radio fucking silence. The documents sit in their vaults, gathering metaphorical cobwebs while 82% of Americans, including 91% of Democrats and 76% of Republicans, are screaming for transparency. This isn't a partisan issue, you dumbass-in-chief. When 9 out of 10 Democrats and 3/4 of Republicans agree on something, you've found a rare moment of national consensus, the kind that comes along about as often as a shithead politician actually keeps a promise. The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. John F. Kennedy. And here we are, perpetuating the myth that this administration gives a single solitary fuck about the truth they campaigned on. The claim: Donald shriveled empty nutsack explicitly promised to release Epstein documents. Campaign rallies, interviews, social media posts where he postured as the transparency champion who'd finally expose elite criminality. The reality: months into having actual power to do this, with appointees who publicly committed to it, we've got nothing but strategic amnesia and institutional stonewalling. The same guy who can't shut the fuck up about crowd sizes and perceived slights suddenly becomes a mute monk when asked about documents that could illuminate one of the most disturbing criminal conspiracies of our time. The obscure power of 5 pissed-off senators. Here's where the institutional machinery gets interesting. And by interesting I mean it reveals just how many tools Congress has that they rarely bother to use. The Rule of Five sounds like something out of a legislative fantasy novel, but it's real, it's legally binding, and it's Democrats' way of saying, fine, if you won't voluntarily do what you promised, we'll force your hand. This law allows any 5 members of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to request federal agencies to provide information about any matter within the jurisdiction of the committee. Not ask politely, not suggest it might be nice. Request with the force of law. Schumer's not fucking around here. He explicitly stated, "Today's letter matters. It's not a stunt. It's not symbolic. It's a formal exercise of congressional power under federal law." Translation: We're done playing nice while you dickwads protect whoever you're protecting. The request covers all documents in DOJ and FBI possession related to the case, all files and evidence they've been hoarding like dragons guarding gold, all materials, which presumably includes those transcripts from DOJ's recent interviews with Ghislaine Maxwell, that the public also can't see. Schumer even addressed the obvious concern: victim privacy. He explicitly said files could be released with redactions to protect victims' identities. "We're not going to force any agreements that have been broken," he said, "but we believe almost everything can come out. In keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future." Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And isn't that the crux of it? Every day these documents remain sealed is another day that whatever evil they contain gets to fester, to metastasize, to spread its roots deeper into institutions we're supposed to trust. The specific hypocrisy that deserves an autopsy. Donald shriveled empty. Nutsack claims he's the transparency president. Already, past tense, mission accomplished. Except, and I cannot stress this enough, 82% of Americans are still waiting for the transparency he promised specifically about this case. The polling data. According to a YouGov poll released Tuesday, 82% of Americans think the government should release all the documents it has about the Epstein case. This includes 91% of Democrats surveyed, 76% of Republicans surveyed. This is the kind of bipartisan consensus politicians claim to crave, but apparently only when it doesn't inconvenience them or whoever they're protecting. When the public speaks this clearly, when you've got near universal agreement across the political spectrum, and leadership still refuses to act, you're not witnessing bureaucratic caution. You're witnessing willful obstruction. This isn't some nuanced policy debate where reasonable people can disagree. This is a straightforward question. Do you release documents about a convicted child sex trafficker and his network of powerful enablers, or do you continue protecting whoever you're protecting at the expense of justice and public trust? The fact that Donald shriveled empty nutsack, who built his entire brand on being the outsider who'd expose elite corruption, is now the one blocking transparency tells you everything you need to know about the gap between campaign rhetoric and governing reality. The truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. Winston Churchill. Churchill would be drinking himself into a stupor watching this shit show. The truth sits in filing cabinets, incontrovertible and documented, while malice and ignorance team up to keep it locked away from the very public that demands it. What we've chosen to protect. Instead of children, the synthesis is clear. We have a system where campaign promises about transparency evaporate the moment they threaten to expose whoever needs protecting. Not bureaucratic caution, not victim privacy concerns. Those can be addressed with redactions, as Schumer explicitly acknowledged. Elite protection masquerading as institutional propriety. These same fucksticks who campaign on law and order, who posture as defenders of children, who wrap themselves in family values rhetoric like it's a fucking security blanket. They're the ones keeping the Epstein documents sealed. They're the ones who, despite having FBI directors and attorneys general who promised releases, despite having 82% public support, despite having explicit campaign commitments, somehow can't manage to unseal files about a convicted pedophile and his network. The projection here is breathtaking. Campaign on draining the swamp. Become the swamp's most devoted lifeguard. Promise transparency about elite corruption. Deploy every institutional barrier to prevent that transparency. Posture as the outsider who'll expose the rot. Turn into the rot's most aggressive defender. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act. but a habit. Aristotle. And what does it say about us that we've made a habit of believing these dickbags when they promise accountability, only to watch them serve up protection for the powerful once they've got the keys to the kingdom? What does it say that Donald Shriveled Empty Nutsack can lie about crowd sizes, election fraud, weather patterns, and basic verifiable facts on a daily basis, and his supporters shrug it off, but when he breaks a specific promise about exposing pedophile networks, there's barely a fucking whimper of protest from the same people who claimed to care about saving the children? The deadline Democrats set is August 15th for DOJ to respond. Schumer made clear that if agencies ignore the request, they'll take it to the courts. This is Democrats finally using the institutional tools available to them, wielding obscure federal laws like weapons against willful stonewalling. And the White House? No immediate response. The Justice Department? Declined to comment. That silence is its own answer. The residue of promises. We chose to forget. There's that smell again. Manila folders gathering dust, redaction ink drying, stale air in locked vaults. The sensory memory of institutional rot that opened this piece, the scent that's become so familiar we barely notice it anymore. Tomorrow, Donald Shriveled Empty Nutsack will tweet about border security or crowd sizes or whatever shiny object catches his attention. His enablers will deflect questions about Epstein documents. And the same 82% of Americans demanding transparency will wake up to find those files still sealed, still protected, still gathering dust, while whoever they're protecting continues walking free. But that's not how it has to be. That's just how it is when we accept that campaign promises about the most vulnerable among us, about children who were trafficked and abused by powerful men, are negotiable once power is achieved. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Dante Alighieri. The question isn't whether Donald Shriveled Empty Nutsack will voluntarily release the documents. He won't. His actions have made that clear. The question is whether we've become so numb to broken promises, so acclimated to the stench of institutional protection for the powerful, so fucking tired of demanding accountability that never comes, that we'll let this slide too. The question is whether 82% public demand means anything in a system where elite protection trumps popular will. The question is whether Democrats' use of the Rule of Five represents a genuine shift toward accountability, or just another symbolic gesture that'll get buried under the next news cycle. The question is what happens to a democracy when the majority clearly demands transparency about child trafficking and gets stonewalling instead, and whether we're too exhausted, too cynical, or too complicit to care anymore.